The sound of Latin chanting drifted over the fence at 6 a.m., followed by the unmistakable splash of holy water hitting concrete. Sarah's heart hammered as she peered through her blinds to see her neighbor Karen leading a robed priest around the empty crater where her pool used to be, gesturing wildly at the cursed ground that was supposedly summoning demons. But Karen had no idea what Sarah had actually buried beneath that pool 15 years ago, or why removing it had just unleashed something far more dangerous than any supernatural force. The rumble of the excavator's engine had been Sarah Chen's alarm clock for 3 days straight. She stood at her kitchen window, steam rising from her coffee mug, watching the massive yellow machine tear another chunk of concrete from what used to be her backyard swimming pool. "Careful around the deep end," she called out to Miguel, the demolition foreman. "There might be some old utility lines down there." Miguel gave her a thumbs up from the cab, but Sarah's stomach twisted with each scoop of debris. There weren't any utility lines in the deep end. There was something else entirely, something she'd hoped would stay buried forever. The pool had been her ex-husband David's obsession. He'd insisted on digging it himself back in 2009, claiming it would save them thousands. What he'd actually saved them from was a murder conviction. "Mrs. Chen." Miguel's voice snapped her back to the present. "We've got a problem." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She rushed outside, her bare feet slapping against the cold morning concrete. The excavator sat silent, its bucket frozen mid-scoop above a jagged hole where the deep end used to be. Miguel climbed down, his face pale beneath his hard hat. "What is it?" Sarah managed to ask, though her throat felt like sandpaper. "Looks like there's something down there. Something that ain't supposed to be." Miguel scratched his graying beard. "Might be an old septic system or something, but..." He trailed off, staring into the crater. Sarah forced herself to look. 8 feet down, partially exposed by the excavator's bucket, a corner of blue plastic top peeked through the dirt. Her vision blurred at the edges. "Could be anything," she said quickly. "Old pool equipment, maybe some chemicals David stored. Down there. With respect, that don't look like pool equipment." Miguel's voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen things he wished he hadn't. "I think we need to call the city. Maybe the police." "No." The word came out sharper than Sarah intended. "I mean, let's not panic. It's probably just, let me call my lawyer first. You know how these city inspectors can be." Miguel stuttered. Her face, and Sarah felt exposed under his scrutiny. 26 years of marriage to a controlling narcissist had taught her how to lie, but Miguel had the weathered look of a man who'd heard every excuse in the book. "Look, Mrs. Chen, I got grandkids. I don't want any trouble. But if that's what I think it is down there..." "It's not," Sarah said, but her voice cracked. "Just give me until tomorrow morning. Please." Before Miguel could respond, the sharp staccato of heels on concrete announced the arrival of Sarah's least favorite person in the world. Karen Whitmore strutted across the yard like she owned it, her platinum blonde hair shellacked into submission despite the October wind. "Sarah, what on earth is all this noise? It's barely 8 in the morning, and some of us have important calls with our book clubs." Sarah bit back the urge to point out that Karen's book club was actually a wine-fueled gossip session that had never discussed an actual book. Just having the pool removed, Karen. The permits are all in order. Karen's surgically enhanced nose wrinkled as she peered into the excavation site. "Well, it certainly smells dreadful over here. Like something died." She fanned herself dramatically, with a perfectly manicured hand. "I do hope you're not planning to leave that unsightly hole in the ground. It's going to absolutely devastate our property values." "I'm putting in a garden," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "A garden." Karen's voice dripped with disdain. "How rustic." Her pale blue eyes suddenly fixed on the exposed top. "What's that blue thing down there?" Sarah's heart stopped. "Pool liner." "It doesn't look like a pool liner to me." Karen pulled out her phone and aimed it at the hole. "It looks like..." "This is a construction site," Miguel interrupted, stepping between Karen and the excavation. "Insurance liability and all that. I'm gonna have to ask you to step back." Karen's face flushed red beneath her foundation. "Excuse me. This is my neighborhood, and I have every right to ensure that proper safety protocols are being followed. Do you have all the necessary permits? Environmental impact studies? I'm on the HOA board, you know. Karen, please, Sarah said, desperation creeping into her voice. It's just a pull removal. Just a pull removal that's creating a health hazard. Karen lifted her chin, a gesture Sarah had learned to fear over their 7 years as neighbors. That smell is absolutely toxic. I'm calling the city environmental department. Sarah watched in horror as Karen dialed, her perfectly painted nails tapping against her phone screen. In 30 minutes, there would be city inspectors crawling all over her property. In an hour, there would be police. By evening, the news crews would arrive. This is Karen Whitmore at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, Karen said into her phone, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when complaining about noise ordinances or demanding that Sarah trim her oak tree. I need to report a potential environmental hazard at my neighbor's property. There's a strong odor of decomposition and what appears to be improperly disposed waste materials. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the porch railing, watching 15 years of carefully maintained secrets crumble like the concrete around her pool. Miguel caught her eye and shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. I got to shut this down until the authorities clear it. No, wait, Sarah started, but Karen's voice cut through her protests. Yes, I'll hold for the environmental emergency. Line. This is definitely an emergency. The excavator's engine fell silent. Miguel began gathering his tools, avoiding Sarah's desperate gaze. And somewhere beneath 8 feet of dirt and concrete debris, wrapped in a blue top that had seemed so secure 15 years ago, David Chen's body waited to tell the world what his wife had done. Karen ended her call with a satisfied smile. They'll be here within the hour. I do hope for your sake, Sarah, that whatever you've been hiding down there was worth it. Sarah stared at her neighbor's retreating form, watching those perfectly painted nails that had just signed her death warrant, and realized that Karen Whitmore had no idea she'd just declared war on a woman with absolutely nothing left to lose. Sarah had 43 minutes before the city inspectors arrived. 43 minutes to figure out how to explain away 15 years of lies, or 43 minutes to run. She stumbled back into her house, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. Her lawyer's office wouldn't open for another hour. Her sister lived in Portland, too far to help, too close to avoid the fallout. There was only one person who knew the truth, and calling him would be like lighting a fuse on her own grave. The phone rang twice before Detective Ray Morrison answered. Sarah. Jesus, it's been what, 3 years? How are you holding up? Ray, I need help. Her voice came out as a whisper. It's about David. The silence stretched so long Sarah thought the call had dropped. When Ray finally spoke, his voice had shifted into the careful, measured tone he'd used during those terrible months after. David disappeared. What about David, Sarah? They're digging up my backyard. The pool. Karen called the city, and they're sending inspectors, and I don't know what to do. Sarah. Ray's voice was gentle but firm. Look at me. Are you telling me what I think you're telling me? She closed her eyes. Ray had been David's partner for 8 years before David left the force. He'd also been the detective assigned to David's missing person case. He'd sat in her living room dozens of times, asking careful questions about David's state of mind, his gambling debts, his drinking problem. Ray had suspected the truth then. She could see it in his eyes, but he'd never pushed. I can't do this over the phone, she whispered. I'm 20 minutes out. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. Sarah hung up and sank onto her kitchen stool, staring out at the excavation site. Miguel had strung yellow caution tape around the perimeter and was packing up his equipment. The hole gaped like an open wound in her backyard, and she could swear. The smell was getting stronger. A sharp knock at her front door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a crisp navy suit holding an official-looking clipboard. Mrs. Chen. I'm Angela Rodriguez from the Environmental Protection Division. We received a complaint about possible contamination on your property. Sarah's palms were slick with sweat as she opened the door. Angela Rodriguez looked like she was barely 30, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of environmental disaster. There's been a misunderstanding, Sarah began. I'm just having an old pool removed. I need to examine the excavation site. Standard procedure. Angela's tone was polite but inflexible. Won't take long. Sarah had no choice but to lead her to the backyard. Angela pulled on latex gloves and approached the caution tape with practiced efficiency. She crouched at the edge of the hole, studying the exposed top with a small flashlight. "How long has this pool been here?" Angela asked, making notes on her clipboard. "About 15 years. My ex-husband built it in 2009. "And when did you last use it?" Sarah's mouth went dry. The last time anyone had been in that pool was the night David died. A few years ago. The maintenance got too expensive. Angela nodded, still examining the site. "I'm seeing some discoloration in the soil around that plastic material. Could be chemical leaching from old pool supplies." She stood up, brushing dirt from her gloves. "I'm going to need to take some soil samples, and we'll have to identify what's in that top before you can continue with the removal." "Is that really necessary?" Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. "It's probably just old pool equipment." Decomposition produces hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other toxic gases. If there's organic matter down there that's been sealed up for years." Angela trailed off, studying Sarah's face. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." Before Sarah could answer, Karen's voice rang out across the yard. "Angela, thank goodness you're here." Sarah watched in horror as Karen approached, flanked by two other neighbors Sarah barely knew, Mrs. Patterson from across the street and the new couple from the corner house. "I've been documenting the smell for 3 days," Karen announced, waving her phone. "It's been absolutely unbearable. We are concerned about health risks to the entire neighborhood." "The smell just started when they began digging," Sarah protested, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "That's not true," Karen shot back. "I've noticed odd odors coming from your backyard for months. Haven't I, Mrs. Patterson?" The elderly woman nodded reluctantly. "There have been unusual smells during certain weather patterns." Angela made more notes. "I'll need to expand the testing area. Mrs. Chen, do you have somewhere else you can stay while we conduct a thorough investigation?" Sarah's vision tunneled. Stay somewhere else. Police involvement. Soil samples. DNA testing. It was over. "Actually," Karen interjected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I think there might be more to this than environmental contamination." She pulled out her phone and showed Angela a photo. "I did some research on the property records. Did you know that Mrs. Chen's husband disappeared in 2009? The same year this pool was built." The blood drained from Sarah's face. Angela's expression shifted from professional concern to sharp interest. "I think we need to expand this investigation beyond environmental concerns," Angela said. "Carefully. I'm going to need to make some calls." Sarah heard the words as if from underwater. Karen's triumphant smile blurred at the edges of her vision. This was it. 15 years of freedom, of building a new life, of sleeping through the night without nightmares, all destroyed by her nosy neighbor's vindictive phone call. "Sarah." Ray Morrison's voice cut through her panic. He jogged across the yard, his detective's badge visible on his belt, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. Angela stepped forward to introduce herself, but Ray held up a hand. "I'm Detective Morrison. Metro PD Mrs. Chen called me about a possible issue with the excavation." His eyes met Sarah's briefly. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Karen stepped forward eagerly. "Detective, I'm so glad you're here. I believe Mrs. Chen has been hiding something in her backyard for years. Her husband disappeared in 2009, and now, Ray interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years on the force. "I'm going to need you to step back and let us handle this investigation." "But I'm the one who..." "Step back. Now." Karen's mouth fell open at the sharp command. She retreated several steps, but Sarah could see the calculating look in her eyes. Karen wasn't done. She was just getting started. Ray approached the excavation site, and Sarah watched. His face carefully. He'd seen crime scenes that would give most people nightmares. He'd pulled bodies from rivers and abandoned buildings. But when he looked down at that blue top, partially exposed in the October sunlight, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We are going to need the coroner," he said quietly to Angela, "and a forensics team." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She sank onto her porch steps, watching her world collapse in real time. But as she looked up at Karen's satisfied smirk, something cold and sharp crystallized in her chest. Karen thought she'd won. Karen thought she'd destroyed Sarah's life out of petty neighborly spite, never imagining the real story buried in that hole. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She had no idea what David Chen had been planning to do to Sarah the night he died, or how many other women he'd hurt before her. And she definitely didn't know about the evidence Sarah had spent 15 years collecting, hidden in a safety deposit box across town, waiting for exactly this moment. As the first police cruiser pulled into her driveway, Sarah stood up slowly and looked directly at Karen. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed," she said quietly. Karen laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, I think I know exactly what. I've unleashed justice." Sarah smiled for the first time in 3 days. "We'll see about that." The forensics team arrived like a swarm of white-suited ants, their equipment cases and evidence bags transforming Sarah's backyard into a crime scene. She watched from her kitchen window as they carefully excavated around the blue top. There. Movements methodical and respectful, the way they handled bodies that mattered. Ray knocked on her back door. "Sarah, we need to talk." She let him in, noting how he positioned himself between her and the door, not quite an arrest, but not quite freedom either. His weathered face carried the weight of old suspicions finally. "Confirmed. Before this goes any further," he said quietly, "I need you to know that I have to read you your rights." "I know. And I need you to know that 25 years on the force taught me the difference between victims and villains." His eyes were kind but tired. "David wasn't a good man, Sarah. We both know that." Sarah's throat tightened. Ray had been the only cop who'd ever looked at the faded bruises on her wrists and asked the right questions. He'd also been the only one who'd seemed unsurprised when David disappeared. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Suspected. From the beginning." The timeline was too convenient. David's gambling debts, his drinking, the life insurance policy, and then suddenly he vanishes right after building a pool. Ray rubbed his face. But knowing and proving are different things. Through the window, Sarah could see Karen holding court with the growing crowd of neighbors, her voice carrying across the yard as she recounted her detective work. Mrs. Patterson nodded along, and the couple from the corner house pulled out their phones to record Karen's performance. "She thinks she solved the crime of the century," Sarah said bitterly. "Has she?" Sarah turned to face Ray fully. "David didn't just disappear, Ray. He was planning to kill me that night." Ray went very still. "Explain." "He'd found out about the money I'd been hiding, the account I'd set up to leave him." Sarah's voice steadied as she spoke the truth she'd carried alone for 15 years. "He came home drunk and furious. Said he was going to make me disappear like I'd never existed. But first, he wanted to have some fun. Sarah, he dragged me out to the pool. Said the water would muffle the sound." Her hands were trembling now, but her voice remained clear. "He held my head under until I almost passed out. Then he pulled me up and asked if I was ready to beg." Ray's jaw clenched. "What happened?" "I grabbed the pull skimmer. The metal handle caught him in the temple." Sarah met his eyes. He went down hard, hit his head on the pool coping on the way into the water. "Was he already dead?" "I don't know. I was too scared to check, too scared to call for help. I pulled him out and wrapped him up and buried him where the pool was going to go anyway." She laughed, a hollow sound. "David always said he wanted to be cremated, but I guess this was close enough." Ray was quiet for a long moment, processing the story he'd probably reconstructed a dozen times in his head over the years. "Sarah, why didn't you call me that night? I would have helped you." "Because I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. David was a cop. I was just the wife with a history of accidents." She gestured toward the window, where Karen was still performing. For her audience. Look how quickly Karen turned this into a murder case. Nobody asks why a woman might kill her husband. Some of us do. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted in the backyard. Through the window, she could see one of the forensics techs standing up from the excavation site, holding something in his gloved hands. Angela Rodriguez hurried over, her clipboard forgotten. Ray's radio crackled. "Detective Morrison, we need you out here." Sarah's legs felt weak. What did they find? Ray didn't answer, but his expression told her everything she needed to know. They walked outside together, and Sarah felt the weight of every neighbor's stare. Karen pushed to the front of the crowd, her eyes bright with vindictive excitement. What is it? Karen called out. What did you find? The forensics tech held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was a cell phone, its case cracked but still recognizable. Even after 15 years in the ground, David's phone had survived. We'll need to get this to the lab, the tech said to Ray. See if any data is recoverable. Sarah's blood turned to ice. David's phone. She'd never thought about David's phone. Karen's voice cut through her panic. That's evidence. That proves she killed him. I need you to step back, Ray began, but Karen was already pulling out her own phone. I'm calling Channel 7, she announced loudly. The public has a right to know there's been a murderer living in their neighborhood for 15 years. Don't you dare, Sarah said, finding her voice. Karen smiled triumphantly. Oh, I dare. I've been documenting everything. Photos, videos, witness statements. By tonight, everyone will know what Sarah Chen really is. The words hit Sarah like a slap. Everyone would know. Her sister, her co-workers, the students she tutored at the community college who looked up to her, the book club members who'd become her closest friends. All of them would learn that quiet, gentle Sarah Chen was actually a killer. But as she watched Karen dial the new station, something clicked into place. Karen wanted to destroy her reputation, her relationships, her entire carefully rebuilt life. Karen wanted to paint her as a cold-blooded murderer who'd fooled everyone for 15 years. You know what, Karen? Sarah said, loud enough for all. The neighbors to hear. Go ahead and call them. Karen paused, confused by Sarah's sudden calm. Call Channel 7. Call Channel 4 and Channel 9 while you're at it. Tell them all about the murder weapon in David Chen's phone. Murder weapon. Karen's voice was uncertain now. Sarah smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Oh yes, David was very thorough about documenting his hobbies. Tell the reporters to ask specifically about the videos he kept on that phone. The ones of all the women he hurt. Ray's eyes sharpened. Sarah, what are you talking about? David had a very specific type, Ray. Vulnerable women. Single mothers. Waitresses working double shifts. Women who couldn't afford to miss work if they were too bruised to come in. Sarah's voice carried across the suddenly quiet crowd. He liked to record what he did to them. As insurance, he said, to make sure they never reported him. Karen's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Is it? You did such thorough research on the property records, Karen. Did you research the 7 missing persons cases that went cold between 2007 and 2009? All women. All last seen in David's patrol area. The forensics tech looked up sharply. Angela Rodriguez stepped closer, her environmental investigation suddenly much more complicated. David kept trophies, Sarah continued, her voice steady and clear. Photos, videos, names and addresses, all stored on his phone and his laptop, which I turned over to the FBI 3 years ago, along with detailed statements from 4 women who survived their encounters with Officer David Chen. The crowd was dead silent now. Karen's phone hung forgotten. In her hand. You want to call the news, Karen? Go ahead. Ask them to do a story about how the wife of a serial rapist and potential serial killer finally got justice after 15 years of keeping his victim's secret safe. Sarah looked directly at her neighbor. Ask them why it took a bitter, vindictive woman's spite to finally bring this case to light. Ray was staring at her. Sarah, are you saying? I'm saying that David Chen got exactly what he deserved. That night. And if you check that phone and find what I think you'll find, you'll discover that I probably saved a lot of women from ending up in holes much deeper than this one. Karen's voice came out as a whisper. You're lying. Am I? Ray, call Agent Patricia Mills at the Bureau. Tell her the Chen case just got a lot more interesting. As Ray reached for his phone, Sarah looked around at her neighbors. Their expressions had shifted from judgment to uncertainty to something. Approaching horror. Mrs. Patterson's hand was pressed to her mouth. The couple from the corner house had stopped recording. Only Karen remained defiant, though her face was ash-gray. "Even if that's true, you still murdered your husband. You're still a killer." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, Karen, I am. And thanks to your phone call this morning, the whole world is about to find out exactly what kind of killer I really am." She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving Karen standing in the ruins of her perfect revenge, finally understanding that some secrets are buried for everyone's protection, not just the person holding the shovel. Behind her, she could hear Ray on the phone with Agent Mills, and she knew that by tomorrow, David's victims would finally have their justice too. But tonight, Karen Whitmore was going to learn what it felt like to be the most hated person in a neighborhood that was about to discover they'd been living next door to a hero all along. Sarah woke at dawn to the sound of Latin chanting drifting through her bedroom window. She stumbled to the glass, still groggy from her first full night's sleep in 15 years, and froze at the sight below. Karen stood in her own backyard wearing a flowing white dress, her arms raised toward Sarah's house as a tall priest in black robes sprinkled holy water over the fence line. Behind them, a small crowd of people Sarah didn't recognize held candles and murmured prayers in response to the priest's incantations. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, grabbing her robe. By the time she made it outside, the bizarre ceremony had moved to her front yard. The priest, a severe-looking man with silver hair and intense dark eyes, stood at the edge of her property with an ornate silver cross, while Karen directed him like a deranged film director. "The evil is strongest there," Karen declared, pointing at the excavation site. "That's where she buried the poor man after she murdered him in cold blood." "Excuse me," Sarah called out, marching across a lawn. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The priest turned toward her, and Sarah was struck by the fervor in his eyes. This wasn't some mild-mannered Episcopal minister. This man had the look of someone who saw demons behind every shadow. "I am Father Malachi Santos," he intoned in a heavy accent Sarah couldn't place. "I have come to cleanse this cursed ground of the evil that has poisoned it." Cursed ground? Sarah looked at Karen incredulously. "Are you insane?" Karen's face was haggard, her usual perfect makeup replaced by dark circles and a manic gleam in her eyes. She'd clearly spent the night researching every supernatural cleansing ritual she could find on the internet. "Don't you dare speak to Father Santos that way," Karen snapped. "He's a real exorcist. He's performed over 300 cleansings across 7 countries. Mrs. Whitmore contacted me through my ministry's emergency line," Father Santos explained, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "She described powerful supernatural disturbances emanating from your property. Foul odors, unnatural sounds, manifestations of darkness." Sarah stared at them both. "You called an exorcist because of a decomposing body." "Not just any body," Karen said triumphantly. "The body of a man whose blood cries out for vengeance. The spirits of the innocent are restless here, Sarah. They demand justice." "The innocent." Sarah's voice rose. "Did you miss the part yesterday where I explained that your innocent victim was a serial rapist?" Father Santos raised his hand for silence. "Evil begets evil, child. Murder stains the soul and calls forth demons. It matters not what sins the deceased may have committed. Your act of violence has opened a doorway to hell itself." Sarah looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers. Some were neighbors she recognized, drawn by curiosity. Others appeared to be followers of Father Santos, clutching religious pamphlets and rosary beads. And threading through the crowd, she spotted the unmistakable silhouettes of news cameras. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "Channel 7 is doing a live broadcast," Karen announced with satisfaction. "Father Santos's ministry has a huge social media following. By noon, the whole world will know about the evil lurking in our neighborhood." A young reporter with perfectly styled hair pushed through the crowd, followed by a cameraman. "I'm Jessica Torres with Channel 7 News. Mrs. Chen, how do you respond to allegations that your property has become a supernatural hotspot following yesterday's disturbing discovery?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Father Santos stepped forward, clearly relishing the spotlight. "The signs are unmistakable," he declared to the camera. "The stench of corruption, the unnatural coldness emanating from the burial site, the reports of strange sounds in the night. This woman's act of violence has torn a hole in the spiritual fabric of reality." "That's not," Sarah began, but Karen cut her off. Tell them about the dreams, Father Santos. Tell them what you saw. The priest's eyes grew distant. Last night, as I prayed for guidance, I was granted a vision. I saw the tormented spirit of David Chen, trapped between worlds by the violent nature of his death. He spoke to me of his suffering, of his need for proper Christian burial and absolution. Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. He spoke to you. David Chen's ghost had a conversation with you. Mock not the mysteries of the divine, Father Santos warned. The dead man's spirit revealed terrible truths. He told me of his wife's jealousy, her greed, her cold-blooded planning of his murder. Planning? Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. He told you it was planned. Karen stepped closer to the camera, her face flushed with vindictive excitement. You see, even from beyond the grave, the truth comes out. Sarah Chen is a cold-blooded killer who destroyed an innocent man for money. The reporter turned to Sarah. Mrs. Chen, how do you respond to these spiritual revelations? Sarah looked. At the cameras, at the crowd of believers hanging on Father Santos's every word, at Karen's triumphant smile. The absurdity of the situation hit her all at once. Here she was, being accused of murder by a ghost who was apparently conducting interviews from beyond the grave. You want to know what I think? Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I think Father Santos is either a fraud or he's been talking to the wrong spirit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Father Santos's face darkened with righteous anger. How dare you? Because if David's ghost really talked to you, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, then ask him about Jennifer Morrison. Ask him about Lisa Park. Ask him about Maria Santos. Wait, Santos. She looked at the priest. Sharply. Any relation? Father Santos went very still. What did you say? Maria Santos, 23 years old. Worked at the diner on 5th Street. Disappeared in July 2008 after her shift. Sarah's voice was steady now, cutting through the morning air like a blade. David's phone had 17 videos of her. 17 different times he assaulted her before she finally vanished. You're lying, Father Santos whispered, but his face had gone ashen. Ask your ghostly informant about the birthmark on her left shoulder, about the scar on her palm from when she tried to fight him off, about how she cried for her daughter every time he stop. Father Santos's voice was barely audible. Maria was my niece. The crowd went dead silent. Karen's face cycled through confusion, denial, and growing horror as she realized what was happening. She came to America to send money home to her family, Sarah continued gently. She was saving up to bring her little girl over from El Salvador. David made sure that never happened. Father Santos's cross slipped from his trembling hands and clattered on the pavement. We never found her body. The police said she probably ran away, went back to El Salvador. She didn't run away, Father. She's been waiting 15 years for someone to care enough to look for the truth. Sarah looked directly at the news camera. David Chen didn't just hurt his wife. He was a predator who used his badge to hunt vulnerable women. Women like your niece. Karen was backing away slowly, shaking her head. No, this isn't. This isn't how this was supposed to go. Father Santos fell to his knees, his followers stirring uneasily as their spiritual leader crumbled before their eyes. Dios mío, he whispered. What have I done? Sarah knelt beside him, her voice gentle now. You've helped bring her killer to justice, Father. Just not the way you thought you would. The priest looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. This time, I thought. I prayed for her every day. I came here to cleanse evil, but the evil was already dead. Yes, Sarah said simply. It was. Behind them, Karen made a strangled sound and fled toward her house, but the news cameras followed her retreat, capturing every stumbling step of her humiliation. Father Santos gripped Sarah's hands. Forgive me, Senora. I have wronged you terribly. There's nothing to forgive, Father. You were trying to help your family find peace. That's exactly what David's victims need too. Sarah helped him to his feet. But if you really want to perform a cleansing ceremony, I know 17 women who could use some prayers. As Father Santos nodded through his tears and the news crew scrambled to reframe their story, Sarah looked back at Karen's house. Through the window, she could see her neighbor's silhouette pacing frantically, a phone pressed to her ear. Karen wasn't done yet. Cornered animals were always the most dangerous, and Sarah had just destroyed everything Karen thought she knew about right and wrong, victim and villain, good and evil. But as she watched Karen's desperate gestures through the glass, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the absolute certainty that when Karen made her next move, the whole world would be watching. And this time, they'd know exactly who the real monster had been all along.